Madam Chair, I would suggest that we hold this committee meeting by mail.
That might work. Would be slow.
Not
Maybe
much slower.
and
Go back
CB
to
radio.
phone. We could do phone first. Oh. Okay, great. Ah, Faith is connected by audio. Hi, Faith. Nope, she's
Oh my
muted.
God. What do
There
you
you are.
Julie is doing a great job, I'm sure.
She is, we're waiting for the documents, the AGI table from Doug Farnham. He's sending it to Julie. Julie's gonna post it.
I have it now. I can get it posted. I just got my internet back.
Got it back? Okay, can you post it?
Yes. Sorry, Doug. Sorry, folks. Thank you, Julie.
Hey,
Julie, hang
Things
on.
happen.
No
No
problem.
kidding. This is a lot of happening today.
Well, I was just getting a little concerned that something had happened to you other than your internet.
Well, other than I had a complete meltdown, I think I'm okay.
We're all melting today. Okay. Well, we've got the workaround for my Zoom, so we're working here.
That's great. Says the table, but the meeting isn't going.
Let's see.
I'm just trying to find your document. Doug, I'm sorry, Julie, could you post it? I can't seem to find it.
Yes, I will.
Thank you.
Okay. There's Senator Ballin. Welcome, Senator. We're just getting started. Faith's internet crashed.
Okay,
I won't say any more than that.
yeah, we were having problems this morning too with the live feed.
We have live feedback. We are live at this moment. We are working to get the documents from Doug posted. And Julie Tucker is assisting, and where's the refresh thing? Okay. Julie, how are we doing?
Well, I have posted it, but it is yet to show up, so I keep
Yeah,
refreshing.
I just hit refresh. All right, mine is refreshing. No.
Julie, do you want to send them the email? It might be faster than waiting for
All
the.
right, I'll do that right.
Okay. So Doug, why don't you start? Julie, can you share it? Put it up on the screen? And split screen it?
Yes.
It's a nice
working
short
on
little
that.
document. Okay.
Would you like me to start, Madam Chair, while we
Yeah,
try to get something
I
posted?
think that would probably be the best thing. I'd like to get people out of here at a reasonable hour since it's hot. Okay. So I have the email, so it is here. Okay. So
All right,
this
sorry.
is, go ahead.
All right, sorry, Madam Chair. So Doug Farnham, Deputy Commissioner of Taxes. And my understanding is we're here to talk about high-income Vermont taxpayers. And the question that initially came up in the context of billionaires was kind of, the word was casually thrown about. What we're able to measure at the tax department is by the adjusted gross income, which I think the committee knows there are all kinds of assumptions and issues built into adjusted gross income. But because that's what we inherit from the federal government, and that's what we base our tax structure off of, that's where we start. That's kind of our starting point for all this. We're talking about income in the door in 1 year and adjusted gross income at that. So in the entire population of Vermont taxpayers with adjusted gross income over 1 million, that's 612 taxpayers. In our state of somewhere around 620,000, 370,000 taxpayers. So 612 taxpayers out of 370,000 are over 1 million in AGI. And I'm going to slice this more as I go through. I'm just giving you the full population over 1 million of AGI, and then I'll dial it in from there. So 612 taxpayers, $114 million of income tax paid, which is 15% of the personal income tax received from tax year 2018. So this population of 600 pays 15% of personal income taxes that we see in its entirety. That averages out to about $187,000 in taxes per filing group. We didn't split it up by single or joint filers, so we would be able to if the committee desired, but we didn't want to go too far down the weeds of, splitting hairs before we got a feel for what else the committee wanted to see. So backing up to then separate out that group of 600 taxpayers, 387 of them, so more than half, are between 1 and 2 million of AGI. And they contribute about 34.6 million of income taxes. Now, one thing to remember about this high income population, JFO and the tax department have studied it in the past. And in general, from year to year, it holds true. The rule of thumb is roughly 50% of high income taxpayers over 1 million of AGI are single event driven. So you see about 50% of the population are repeatedly high income, truly sustained high income, and about 50% are high capital gains events.
So that's an inheritance kind of thing,
It could be an inheritance
or an
situation.
investment. You're selling a house, your second home, that kind of thing.
You could be selling a house, a business. It couldn't be your primary residence because that's going to be excluded from income taxes, but it would have to be a second home or a business or an investment of some kind. So that's 1 to 2 million. So a big portion of the population is in that 1 to 2 million range. 173, and these brackets are a little bit weird because the population's small, so we had to finesse them a bit. 2 to 5 million of AGI is 173 taxpayers, and they contribute 33.5. So they pay about 194,000 on average. So they, logically, they pay about twice as much in taxes as the group with 1 to 2 million. And then it falls off very sharply after that. From 5 to 10 million is 26 taxpayers, contributing 10.5 million overall from 26 taxpayers. And then we go 10 to 18 million is 15 taxpayers, contributing 11 million. And then over 18 million is unfortunately the smallest group that I can report to the committee at this time, because we have 11 taxpayers that have an AGI in Vermont of over $18 million. And we're not allowed to report groups smaller than 10 in order to protect taxpayer confidentiality. And that group, the 11 taxpayers contribute $24.4 million in personal income taxes. So their average is 2.2 million in taxes that each of them pay to the state of Vermont. One important caveat for the committee's understanding is that this is AGI, adjusted gross income, that's apportioned to the state of Vermont. So if we looked at it and a lot of the potentially high income federally, but very low income Vermont, we felt that would muddy up the numbers and not really give you a true story, because we can only tax Vermont income anyway. We cannot treat someone differently because they're a millionaire in other states. That wouldn't be constitutional to consider that other state activity to be outside.
Can you,
at
can
least
you
in
say,
the department's opinion.
Doug, can you say that again?
Right. So these numbers are all Vermont residents. So either they're claiming a Vermont domicile or they have a very high apportionment to Vermont of their income, we're not contemplating income that's being made in other states because that would be off the board anyway. So this is all Vermont income.
Or it could be you sold your vacation chalet in Vermont. Because this is also that highly volatile. I know the top bracket is the most highly volatile of all the brackets. People move in and out.
Yes, and throughout the over $1 million of AGI, that roughly 50% rule of volatility was about true. So of these 600, maybe roughly 300 are sustained high level of income. And roughly 300 are going to be, yeah, they're millionaires this year, but in general, they haven't been.
Sandra Pearson.
Thank you, Doug. This is helpful. You hear me all right?
Yes, Senator.
Where do we crudely think the line is for taxpayers who saw benefit under the Trump tax cuts? Because it's well below $1 million, as if I understand.
So that is a very good question, Senator. It's also a very complicated question because yes, they saw a general benefit above 250,000, I think was somewhere around where you started to see more benefit accruing to the upper income brackets at the federal level. But in states with higher state and local tax deductions, the federal cap of $10,000 on state and local taxes means that many very high income Vermonters actually came out with a higher federal tax bill because they stopped receiving credit. If they owned a great amount of property in Vermont or they were paying a lot of Vermont taxes. So for instance, the group that's paying an average of 2.2 million in taxes to Vermont, they're no longer getting credit. They're no longer getting a massive deduction on their federal side. So the Trump tax cuts, I'm gonna try to make sure I don't let any personal opinions slip through into what I say here.
Okay.
The Trump tax cuts were structurally crafted to damage Democratic leaning states and progressive income tax states in particular. So I think that's a fair statement. I don't think anyone would say that that was overly political. They were just structurally designed to do that. That SALT cap means that high income Vermonters did not receive the same benefit from I'm trying to remember the actual name of the bill, but now Trump tax cuts is just sticking in my head. The 2017 federal tax reform benefited high income taxpayers in states with a lower or less progressive income tax much more than it did in Vermont, to the point where it's not a certainty that those high income Vermonters are actually better off. Now, if they are getting their income through a business or if they are corporate owners, there were other benefits federally that would complicate the situation. So if all of their income is personal income and it's not flowing through the business deductions at the federal level, then in Vermont, they may not be better off at all. But if they're able to take advantage of those additional business income deductions at the federal level, then yes, I would say that overall, they still came out ahead. Did that answer your question, Senator? I know not completely, but.
Well, I never like the answer that it's more complicated than that, but that doesn't change the reality. I think you did a good job helping me understand some of the complexity.
I know that working CEOs, even of some larger nonprofits, if you are getting a good salary and you own a house in a town with high taxes, you were paying more taxes in general because you can't deduct any of that like you could the year before. On the other hand, this is income. It's not necessarily wealth. So if I have a trust fund and I only draw down $90,000 a year, I'm getting property tax assistance. But that's my income, but it's not my wealth. And the tax department doesn't know my wealth, right, until I draw income.
Well, technically, right now, the tax department has no clean way to get at any taxpayer's asset levels. The grand list data is not established in a way that we can cross-reference it easily to determine what someone owns, because Vermont recognizes and follows the federal rules for fiduciary and pass-through entities. Someone's actual wealth could be distributed among 6 trusts and 4 pass-through entities. And that person may own all of those things, but we would not be able to determine that at the tax department without a significant level of audit. And then because of the liability rules and laws in place, we wouldn't be able to attribute that wealth legally to that individual. That's the whole purpose of those structures. So
Trust funds. Yeah. So there's income and there's wealth, and income can vary widely. We probably have a fewer less wealthy people than we did the first of the year. They may be coming back, but I know I'm avoiding looking at my IRA just because I don't want to get further depressed. But, income varies. And in the upper tax brackets, it seems to vary more. I always remember the person that came to see me who sold off some land on his farm so he could pay his property taxes, only to find out because he sold the land to pay the taxes, it put him in the next tax bracket and he lost all his rebates and actually ended off worse off than he was. But he popped up in that higher tax bracket for that 1 year.
might I volunteer another couple things, Madam Chair? So one is the department has been intending to do a longitudinal study of our upper tax brackets because of access to data. We're really the only ones who are able to perform that. Unfortunately, along with everybody else, our plans were disrupted by COVID, and we have a lot of other more pressing concerns. So we do think that a longitudinal study of our wealthy population would be very valuable, but it's definitely something that would take us some time to conduct. And I think that longitudinal analysis really would answer a lot of the questions we have about at least our high income population, not necessarily our wealthy asset-wise population. And then the other thing I can say, now this is not properly sourced because it's from something I read last year, but I'm still going to share it with the committee. My recollection is that looking at distribution of high income, we're not at the bottom of the states. We're pretty much right at the 25th percent mark. So we're in the top of the bottom quartile as far as high income populations. It makes sense since we are a rural state, but we're also not far from New York and Massachusetts. We're kind of not in the middle, but we're at the top of the bottom quartile as far as high wealth, high income. Again, that's talking about their income levels, not their asset levels.
Right.
And then the other thing I would add is that the only proxy the department currently has for determining someone's asset size is their passive income. And we have those, the doubling of passive income above a certain threshold for household income. that's intended to be a very basic, very blunt asset test, which of course is exempted for individuals over 65, which is the vast majority of people who have more than 20,000 of, it's either, sorry, 10,000 or 20,000 of passive income. The very, very rough math there is that prior to COVID, this is a big caveat, prior to COVID, $10,000 of passive income translated roughly to $1 million of cash assets, investment assets. So if you saw someone with 30,000 of passive income, they have roughly 3 million of investments, depending on how well they're doing their investments. And that was, but that's the only window we have, is that passive income right now. And it's definitely an imperfect one. But it does have a rough scale to it that, you know, if someone has 40 or 50,000 of passive income, then they have a significant amount of assets far beyond what a normal Vermonter would have access to.
Okay. Committee, any questions? Okay. Thank you, Doug. We're going to have you back, I think, Tuesday to talk about the safe harbor use tax table and a couple other things. Faith Maiden, I've sent you. That came up at 4:30 yesterday.
Madam Chair,
Yes.
before
All right, there you are.
before Doug goes, this has been very helpful because you have pointed out to us again things we have learned and understand to be the case for over last couple of decades. The extremeness of it has changed somewhat, where we have the distance between the wealthy and the poor are greater and greater every year. And the most recent tax cut has changed the relationships a little bit. But the chair asked earlier about folks that had trust funds and other sources of income that they were not obliged to disclose when they paid their school taxes based on income. That they had assets that did not count as income. The Finance Committee has discussed and floated with the tax departments in the last decade on several occasions that folks who receive great school tax reductions based on income be obliged to say or to attest to the fact that they do not owe a certain level of assets while they apply for their homestead income treatment. And that would be one way to deal with that issue. Currently, we simply have drawn a line where people without income and assets do not get the assistance from school, their school obligations, whereas other people with plenty of assets that are unrecorded are treated the same way. And that I'm maybe making a statement, Madam Chair, more than a question, but we seem to be gradually getting farther into a system in which some people, Americans, are too rich to tax, and the other group is too poor to be given any relief. And every year we tend to move farther in that direction. How would we use this COVID thing to pull things a little tighter together, Commissioner?
Sorry. So I would say I do remember the conversations about asset testing, and I do think that I know Commissioner Sampson, and I haven't spoken in depth with Commissioner Boley about this, but I suspect he would be sympathetic to the concept of trying to get at asset testing. We haven't successfully come up with a way to do it where we felt like, okay, we can administer this, we can back this up, because an attestation would be well and good, but one is, how do we enforce the attestation? And two is, how do we account for the complex ownership structures like fiduciary instruments and like pass-through entities where they may own $20 million of property indirectly, where they aren't the legal owner anywhere. And some states do have a look through, to be honest. I'm not recommending anything right now, but some states do look through pass-throughs when they're considering certain things. They say, yep, pass-throughs are all well and good, but you own these assets in reality. You have control of these assets. I think Senator Sorokin and others who push the controlling interest language in property transfer, that concept, that is a look-through, essentially. So I think we've dipped our toes in that water of saying, you know, just because you have a legal entity established for liability purposes and ownership purposes, that doesn't mean we won't consider you an owner. So I think we are going to be very limited this year because of the federal restrictions on the CARES money and how we use those federal funds. So I do think this would be a hard year to reform income sensitivity in significant ways, just because we're already facing a lot of pressure in the system that we haven't found perfect answers for, as far as how we're going to address the pressure that we're already seeing, much less reform income sensitivity. I'm sorry, Senator. I know that was a bit rambling, but
not at all. That's you've suggested the sort of concerns that are been dealt with for the last 20 years, and this isn't a good time. And a few years ago it wasn't a good time, and it wasn't. If you keep not addressing it and expect things to change, if we, not you, altogether, keep not addressing what we see happening before our very eyes, and then complain about it, I think there's a definition for that.
Madam Chair, may I revisit one thing for Senator Pearson?
Yes.
In my, when I was talking about the relative position of high income Vermonters, because of the SALT cap with, not being able to deduct a certain amount of state and local taxes, there's a lot of things I didn't mention there, but a big one is that generally the impact on your final position between federal and state taxes is 3-to-1 federally. So I think it is fair to say that if they were able to receive a great benefit federally, they would have to see a massive shift in their Vermont income tax liability to make up for that. Just to be fair in the discussion, generally speaking, it's 3-to-1. So it's not like a level of AGI would result in a similar impact, dollars and cents wise, federally and state. The needle moves much more quickly at the federal level. So I acknowledge that if they received a very significant federal break, even if their Vermont taxes went up, it may not have gone up to the same extent.
Right. But if we want to equal it out, we'd have to raise it 3 times.
Right.
Okay.
Well, we don't have to strive for a perfect reversal. But I thought you said, Doug, that the impact was that they're paying more in federal income tax because they don't get to excuse all of their state income tax. But you're now saying that is true, but it probably was still overwhelmed by the cut they got.
Yeah, it's challenging to run the numbers. If they were not a business person, they might still come out ahead, but not as ahead. If they are running their income through a business that is allowable for that deduction at the federal level that mimics the corporate income tax rate cuts at the federal level, then I think they would just be winners federally and, not losers at the Vermont level at this moment. So I think, just to be fair, I wanted to make sure I brought up that rate difference is pretty significant at the higher levels, that 3-to-1 relationship.
And so we hear sometimes, I can't remember the total, but it's like to the tune of $250 million of savings. The Trump tax cuts generated that much savings from primarily wealthy Vermonters. So do you have a sense if that's accurate, or is that just based on a crude estimation from some national figures? Or do you have any way of helping us? Or Graham, I see you popping on.
Popped up.
Maybe you
Graham's
can.
probably checked it more than I have.
Yeah, sorry about that, Doug. I don't mean to interrupt. The estimate that you're talking about comes from the Institute of Taxation and Economic Policy. They're a think tank in Washington, slightly left-leaning, I would say. They have a model that ran estimates solely on a population of Vermont taxpayers. So the number that you're seeing is based upon an actual Vermont population. I follow up with them. There's a couple pieces in there that I'm not, that I wouldn't say are totally great, but such as, for instance, they said that like some of the corporate tax cuts, even though they're corporation tax cuts, the money ultimately flows through to the individual taxpayer. And so they counted those as tax cuts. That was roughly, I think, something like 50 million of the 250. But yeah, I mean, that's the only Vermont specific analysis that I've seen. And generally those estimates jive with sort of the national figures that I've seen from other think tanks. I don't JFO nor Tax have done a specific Vermont run of federal tax cuts impact, the impact of the federal bill on people's federal tax liabilities. So we only have that ITEB one, which is Vermont specific, and then sort of cross comparing it with some of the results from the Joint Committee on Taxation, as well as some other think tanks like the Tax Policy Center.
Just one thing that perhaps we can raise is we have all kinds of estimates from other people who really haven't studied our data with specificity. And generally the results of their study depends upon where they lean on the political spectrum. Doug said one thing, though, that I think was particularly important, is that of those people who are high income taxpayers, about half of them are consistently high income taxpayers. And I wonder, Doug, if it's possible to take a look at what they paid in taxes as a percentage of their income by bracket in 2017. Well, yeah, in the first year that the tax cuts, the federal tax cuts took effect, and then look at those same percentages in the prior year of those taxpayers who were consistently reporting higher income. And that would be at least, I think, a reasonable indicator as to what's actually happening. Are they benefiting or are they not benefiting?
Okay, so, yeah.
Sorry, the chair is very quiet for me for some reason.
No,
I don't wanna
I
step on the
said
chair.
that,
Oh, there we go.
that was an interesting, because when we talk about, we're looking at what, 306 approximate taxpayers. If you've got 612 and half of them are only there for 1 year. So that's 306 people. How much, we're not going to get enough money to accomplish anything meaningful out of 300 people. We talk about the bottom, the top tax bracket, which is 370, what are we at 2.6? It's significantly lower than $1 million. And the bill we have in committee that was talking about taxing the rich started at 200. And it struck me as we were going through the COVID crisis that if we'd passed that bill, we would be putting a surcharge on the taxes of many of the doctors and nurses, especially if they're filing jointly, who are out there on the front lines and who may jointly owe $500,000 in student loans. So it depends on where you cut it and what you leave in and out. And the other thing is, we need doctors and nurses in this state. And so at what level do you start doing those, those surcharges? They're higher income, but we desperately need them. Senator Campion.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Doug, or Graham, do we have a comparison somewhere? I'm sure it's you could just direct us to it or direct me to it. It shows how we tax some of these folks compared to other states. I mean, I just keep coming back to thinking, you know, even if one were to inherit $10 to $18 million once and they happen to, you know, get caught up, that's still an awful lot of money. It's much different than the folks that are inheriting one time $25,000, $50,000. So I'd be interested in kind of getting a sense of what other states might do when income at that level is coming in.
So my response to that first, I think,
completely wrong, but I don't know if, you know, paying some additional dollars there is going to deter people from coming to this state. That's just
No, not at the $1 million level. If you're at,
but if you're at a 200,000, absolutely.
Yeah.
I think. I mean, well, I don't know. It depends. I mean, people have children. Yeah. It's complicated.
People at 200,000 pay more income taxes in New York and Massachusetts than they do in Vermont because our brackets kick in at much higher incomes. So
right.
Maine kicks it. Yeah.
Yeah. But the
Very
comparison,
unique.
maybe, you know, Graham, you may have even shared this with us in the past. It's a document that just breaks down a little bit more what Vermont looks like compared to, you know, again, maybe just the rest of New England and the mid-Atlantic states.
Yeah, so I think I can think of two documents that our office has produced. One is the 10-year tax study where we did sort of hypotheticals in there, but that was under a tax system from 2017. Our tax system is a little bit different now than it was back then, but it's still broadly pretty close. So I can send that along to the committee. The second is, and I was going to say that I think it largely depends upon how these high income people are getting their income. So, and this goes to the second document that I did, which was related to the capital gains exclusion that we have in our tax code. And so if you have a very large capital gains from an investment sale or from a property from a farm, you're able to exclude up to 40% of that gain from your taxable income with a cap, which we put in last year of
Dealt with this last year.
Yeah, that was last year, a cap of I think $850,000 in capital gains. If you were a high income person and you made your money through a capital gain, I determined that we had some of the best. You were best to be in Vermont relative to other states because of that capital gains exclusion. If you made your income through wages, then it might be a completely different story. I think Senator McDonald is right, though, that I think in general, because our high income rates don't kick in till relatively high in the spectrum and relatively high in the income distribution, and our lower tax brackets are a relatively lower rate at 3.35, and that goes up to about $60,000. Then the effective tax rate that someone is paying, I would say probably under 250,000, is likely lower than most New England states. It's only once you get past that 250, I would guess, is where things start to, increase quite quickly in terms of your effective tax rate, where I think that's where we would become in line or maybe more, it'd be a higher tax rate compared to other states. So I'll send you those two documents.
Thanks, Graham.
Well, one thing that I think we ought to interject at this point, I've heard here today that and we're talking about the high income taxpayer, that you pay much higher rates in New York and much higher rates in Massachusetts, and that simply isn't true. The top marginal rate in Massachusetts is 5%. It's 5%. The top marginal rate in New York is 8.82%. And in Vermont, the top marginal rate is 8.75%. Now, yeah, sure, there may be an effect depending upon how progressive the tax rate is on lower income people. But for a person who's making $18 million a year, the top rate applies to virtually all of his or her income. And that person in Massachusetts, if it's earned income, is going to do better than they are in Vermont. And in New York, it's not going to, it's a matter of tenths of a percentage point, hundreds of a percent.
I think that's a
Madam
correct
Chair.
statement. I think that the further you are beyond our, the limit of our highest tax rates, then the more likely you are to be much higher. So as you said, $18 million, most of your income is going to be taxed at the 8.75 rate. And I think that's a fair comparison. I don't dispute that. I just think it depends. Well, I don't know where the cutoff here in high income is, but if it's 300,000, it might be a completely different story than say 2-3 million. And again, it also depends on where they're getting their income. Because even if someone say had, I think my examples in the capital gains exclusion, if they had something like $5 million worth of income, which most of it came from capital gains, they would have a lower effective tax rate here because of that capital gains exclusion than Massachusetts, which has only a 5% flat rate. So I agree. It varies depending on not just how they make their income, but how much they have in their income. Because if they're well beyond that top bracket threshold, then they're going to be paying the highest marginal rate on most of their income.
Yes, Madam Chair, Senator Brock is correct, talking about the very high income. The testimony in our committee has been folks around $300,000 are often surprised when they come to Vermont and find that if that's earned income, they're doing better than they were in New York and Massachusetts at that level. So
Well,
I think both of those statements are true.
then
Senator Brock's.
we won't talk about property taxes. So, because ours are higher, except for New Hampshire. So it's the entire tax burden. On Tuesday, I think we are going to be going into the, we're going to get everybody a copy of the original Tax Study Commission, which focused on this competitive marginal tax rate, AGI. And so we'll look at that. We're going to look at the new tax commission, which is supposed to be updating what the original did, and then focusing on the property tax, which does add into your tax burden. And then, this is all, informational as we move forward. Right now, we're looking at filling holes if we have to. But after that, we may want to make some adjustments in the tax code. We did some major ones last year.
So, Madam Chair, may I ask, do we have a document at JFO or in the legislature that outlines for us the recommendations that we did adopt from that original commission? Because that was almost 10 years ago now, right?
Yeah, I don't know. I know that last year we managed to flatten the top bracket, and go to AGI. I know that Ways and Means spent almost one whole session trying to find a way to do that. But whatever they did, this was during the last recession, and it impacted slightly upwards taxes on the middle class. And that just wasn't seen as the time to do that. So we didn't achieve that major goal. I know one of the other ones was to start taxing services.
Right.
And if you did that, then you could drop the tax rate, which could end up all the stories about people going to New Hampshire to buy their beer and cigarettes and soda. But those are the two I remember, and the two we haven't done too much. But there's been federal changes in the middle, but we'll get the tax there. I believe there was a summary, and we can start trying to find it somewhere. just to have to refer to. And I know Graham did a lot of comparisons when we were looking at that capital gains. But I think you've done other taxes for us, Graham.
Yeah, I've done some. I'm trying to remember some. I think quickly jogging my memory about Senator Bailent's question. I don't know if we prepared a document that sort of said the recommendation was this, we've done this, or we haven't done something like that. I think I could put together a document that takes the summary recommendations that they've made, and using the knowledge that I have, sort of giving a sense of whether the legislature's done some of these things or not.
There's gotta be some around.
Yeah, I just think it will make more sense to look at that information in light of whatever changes we've made.
Michael headed that, then went to
Mike Costa.
Michael Costa. And we might be able to get him to come in and talk to us because he was very good at presenting. And he probably has the documents or can remember them from memory.
Well, the reports are out on the web and they're very readable.
Yeah.
And are worth reading. Now, bear in mind that report had a lot of agreement between the members, but there was not full agreement with all the recommendations. And there's also a minority report that is included in there.
I'd like to mention.
Go ahead, Doug.
I think Sean, the staffer for the Tax Structure Commission, I believe he might have prepared a document early on in the Structure Commission talking about what Vermont had adopted and what Vermont hadn't adopted from the Blue Ribbon Tax Commission report. I seem to remember that from early on in the Tax Structure Commission's discussion. So he might have something already, Graham.
And he's on our list to have come in. So
I will let him know that the committee was looking for something like that.
Okay. Okay, we are now seriously behind. Graham is here to talk to us about personal care products in lodging. I'm starting to get some emails about concerns about changes at this point. The lodging industry is under severe stress with COVID, and they're not at all comfortable with the thought of any kind of communal dispensers, since we're doing away with most other, like ketchup bottle communal dispensers. And they would like us to wait until the virus and the market and the public fears have settled down. I don't know if any of you have gotten those. I have independent folks who also happen to do a bunch of weddings, and I know we've all gotten emails from the wedding and all the auxiliary things that attach to weddings, like tent rentals, photographers. None of you are getting those emails?
Oh yeah, I am.
As I say, I got a ton of them.
Wait, what does it have to do with photography? I'm sorry, is this connected to something else?
Well, no, this is the whole wedding industry. There's wedding photographers, and apparently the governor has said they'll have to return deposits if people decide to go elsewhere. And they have contracts, but I mean, it is that whole tourism, bed and breakfast kind of market is shaky right now.
Well, it's shut down right now.
Pardon?
It's shut down.
Some of it is.
Unless they're emergency workers or essential workers. At least in our community, there are no nothing's open.
Okay, well, this is local, I think they're planning on being open. If they aren't, we've got another problem, but they're just feeling that right now, with people being so nervous about going out in public, to take them out in public and then say, and by the way, you've got to use this communal shampoo bottle, might make people more queasy. But that's just thrown out there for information and concerns that are there. I had asked,
Senator Cummings, I wanted to let you know that Senator Kitchell just joined the meeting. I know you're behind, but you may want to reorder the agenda so that you could take a conversation with Senator Kitchell.
okay, well, I don't, Dan and Graham, what's your schedule like?
I can come back.
I can come back as well.
Okay, I don't think this is going to take that long. So Senator Kitchell, welcome. We're going to jump down to the current thinking on FY21 budget. We're,
Well, that you're
again,
giving me compliments that I'm thinking.
oh, okay. We're trying to get, well, we're looking at the big hole in the ed fund. We're talking about if, we don't get permission or federal money doesn't come through, what are we going to do? But right now, there seems to be some hedging of our bets, and I'm just wondering if you could share,
Okay.
as we're constructing things, what are we doing?
All right. Well, let me tell you, in terms of the budget, we're starting out with first quarter budget. We're calling it the Q1 budget. And working from, if we have to achieve a certain level of general fund reduction, how we can make that work in a way that makes sense. And obviously, what we're trying to do is be as creative, but also cautious about how we use CRF funding. So the budget will be for the first 3 months. It would give us more time, as you know. There's a bill coming with language that has the official forecast, revenue forecast, moved up to August. And the hope is by August, we will have a better sense, the economists will have a better sense of what the revenue picture looks like for FY21. Right now, the general fund revenue forecast, unofficial, but from Tom Covet, is suggesting that our 21 revenues will be about $230 million less than the official January forecast. So that's what we have to work with right now. There's also 100 million, I believe, at this point for education fund, and about
133, I heard,
and
read in the
100
paper.
well, there might, it keeps moving a bit. And then of course, transportation. So because of the fluidity of the circumstances, the possibility that we will have further action on the federal level, recognizing the plight that states are in, that we may see another COVID bill. So we have 1.25 billion that has been awarded to us. The only state that got more per capita was Wyoming. And that sounds like an awful lot of money, but it goes very, very quickly. At this point, our plan is to reserve and allocate 150 million of the CRF dollars to be available to address in the best way, in the permissible way that we can for CRF funding. So we realize that the pressure on the education fund it's going to be pretty significant. The House is going to be sending over a yield bill, and we will take it from there. The yield bill, I believe, is just based on the actual higher spending that schools have approved in their budget. So I want
The
to
150 million is reserved for the ed fund, right?
well, it would be to how we could use it to address educational costs.
Right,
And-
okay, but it would, yeah, because we're also reserving for transportation and for general fund, I
Yeah.
believe.
And so, yes, we are. And so that is going to be the challenge, and people are working on it. I know on the House side, Ways and Means and Education have been working and on a similar note, and I believe that Senator Hardy has been putting together a similar kind of construct. So
Has
everybody,
that all set, and I've asked her if I can share it with the committee. She sent it to me yesterday.
I see. Well, I suppose I don't know if it would come over as a committee recommendation or she's advancing it as an individual senator. But I can let you know that right from the get-go, there's been concern about what the loss of revenues to the ed fund would mean on property taxes. And so
Local education taxes.
pardon me?
Local education taxes.
Well, he's being a teacher, ignore him.
Sorry. Look, I emailed the chair at 4 a.m. yesterday morning, so
I kept saying that's gotta be a typo. Only Vince emails at 4 a.m.
No, I was up emailing. So the one thing that I would say is, as you build a budget for next year, what got proposed and what people wanted to do in January is very different than what we're dealing with today. And so our goal is to deal with that general fund loss of 230 million in the most thoughtful way we can. But it means that anything that would add additional pressure would be a real problem. And anything that would create a tax expenditure, we have to take right off the top. So if you passed anything that reduced revenues, and for 21, that the Senate would have to accommodate that loss in revenue when we build our budget, which de facto means that tax expenditure becomes the highest priority for government spending, inherent in doing that. So my plead is to not add any more pressure on our general fund dilemma than we have. Obviously, the CRF money is an opportunity to do some things, as we talked about in the caucus yesterday morning. And we want to use this as an opportunity to maybe make progress on some very important long-term goals that we talked about. So my plea is to be very, very sensitive to that interplay between anything that would have a revenue impact and what it means when the Senate Appropriations has to build a budget. You can say, well, we want to put it in, and then the House can kill it. It doesn't matter. As long as the Senate, if it's out there and it passed, I would have to take whatever, if it's 1 million, 2 million, whatever, off the available revenues for the budget, and I would have to find reductions to accommodate it. So there's a very direct interplay between tax expenditures and the appropriations process. So the House is hopefully going to get out their Q1 budget maybe tomorrow, and then that will be something that we can work on. And we are looking at the CRF money. As I say, it sounds like a lot, but when you start adding up chunks of 200 million here or 150 million here, it is quite amazing. I will tell you that the general feeling I have, and I believe it's going to be reflected on the House side as well, as with so many unknowns with this, to simply empty out that grant for July 1st is we do not feel is fiscally prudent, and we want to reserve money so that we have got something that we can draw upon between July 1st and the end of December, when the COVID grant has to be spent. So those are two big chunks, one of which is reserving some money for the September to December period, and have it available after July 1st for all the unknowns that are out there. And the other big priority, which we talked about, and I know it's been a priority for your committee, and that is how we can use the CRF money to advance our connectivity and our broadband goals. Everybody, and I remember vividly Tom Cavett saying, that is the best thing we can do for economic development. So it's not only economic development, but it's all the other connectivity goals. And I will tell you that our hope, and we have, as I mentioned, we have the resources now of a consultant to help us think about where we make those investments so that they're smart, they build us toward the future, and they are things that are doable between now and December. So that resource that will be available as we're allocating the money, I think is going to be particularly valuable. And I did send a copy of the scope of work to Senator Brock and Senator Pearson, who serve on the Joint Information Technology Oversight Committee with me. And so that's sort of it from where we're standing right now. Today, we passed out a bill that will help towns and cities and municipalities with their COVID-related expenditures. I wanted to do it in the budget adjustment or the interest rate bill or the interest assistance bill, but the House preferred that it go separately. It seemed like it was the same thing. It was helping local government with their costs in the same way that we were addressing other costs within other branches of government or within state government. But so that bill is moving forward separately. And that's sort of it as of right now. Senator Pearson, you have your, and you're the chair, so.
That's fine. We run a loose committee, Senator Pearson.
Yeah, after all, one of our members was in space for most of the hearing, although.
Now in the desert, I
Now
think.
he's-
I thought it was William Shatner had come to visit us for a while.
It's Portugal.
I was going to say, that looks a lot like Spain to me.
Yeah, or Lord of the Rings, I'm not sure.
It'd be a lot nicer picture if I wasn't in it.
Sarah Kitchell,
I hardly wait to get my hair cut, I can tell you that.
yeah, you and me both, these hot days, my hair grows.
Next Thursday. I'm not here next Thursday morning.
Chris, you had a
Senator
question.
Kitchell, I know we all are hanging on to the hope that the feds will help us fill some revenue holes, but I do think it's prudent to be preparing for having to deal with these shortfalls ourselves. At this point, do you imagine it being all cuts, or would you be looking to us to find ways to, we probably wouldn't be able to cut it in half, but any sense of cuts versus hope for new revenue? I mean, any framework you can offer us?
No, at this point, we're not, our plan is not to look at new revenues, but to see how we can make things work. There can be savings within government. There's certain savings that are right now in terms of, not filling vacancies and those kinds of administrative strategies. So we're going to be looking at that first. And it will be, I think the impression was that there would just be 23% funding and there would be reductions, but that's not, we're going to be looking at where do we have discretionary grants? How can we use CRF money? What can we do through workforce savings? And those are going to be what we look at first, where the House's Joint Fiscal is working to compile a list of what those options might be, and they'll be reflected in what the House passes. But we're not looking right now at on the revenue side.
And
That's the general fund, though, right? Not because in the ed fund we don't control the spending.
Well, I think the yield bill will call for a tax rate increase of, was it 3 cents or something?
Quarter. Yeah.
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 Right, but that's just covering. That's not covering the $130 to $160 million hole, which is the sales tax.
Well, let me tell you, if we're able to justify costs of the education with kids coming back, with teaching needs and so forth, then that's why we're allocating or reserving that 150 for that very purpose, to see how that might roll out. And, you know, the other thing is sometimes they relax the requirements. And so with that many unknowns, we don't want to spend money that really could provide that kind of relief or that kind of remedy. So that's our plan right now.
I think what this committee's been doing is looking at, just in case the feds say no, what's our doomsday plan? I mean, how are we going to fill that hole if we can't do it with CARES money? So.
And that's what we're going to be talking with the treasurer about later, correct? In part.
Well, the treasurer probably is not going to be, you're talking about US Treasury, because that's where we get the guidance on the CARES money.
No, we're talking.
No, we're talking about, yeah.
What could we do?
I mean,
If we can't use the CARES money, what are we
No.
gonna do if we can't use the CARES?
We can't use the CARES money. We have tax, borrow, or cut.
Yeah.
And we're just looking at mixtures.
I see. Well, I guess what I am telling you is, from an appropriations perspective, we want to reserve the money in the hopes that we can make this work. And so that's the first step. And smart people are looking at it, and I'm going to keep my fingers crossed. Senator Pearson again, and then Senator Sorokin.
Well, so two questions. The both kind of around the Ed Fund. Do we have a sense how do schools handle the idea that we are not actually making a decision for the year? After all, they get underway in the first quarter, but they can't very well make an alteration starting October 1st if we change our mind as the full budget rolls out. So I'm wondering how we're thinking that piece through.
The Appropriations Committee has not, I think setting the yield was the first step.
I think what we're saying is, this is your yield. We don't have a deficit till we get to next June.
That's right.
So somehow we're going to have to come up with the money to pay the schools, but we aren't going to change the tax rate in the middle of the school year. It's next year, if we can't backfill enough with COVID, or we don't get permission to just backfill. And I think the challenge is, the Appropriations Committee and general government has been through this time and time again. The Ed Fund, until this past year, was always guaranteed its full amount plus an inflator. So it has been protected. This is the first year where the Ed Fund is being hit directly by loss in revenue. And we don't have any practice in how you make those cuts, and we don't have control over making those cuts. So I think it's more challenging.
And I think next year's budgets are going to be where we'll see those decisions having to be made. The other thing is, certainly the revenue stream into the Ed Fund got changed dramatically several years ago. And as we know, those revenue streams have been particularly hard hit as a result. I mean, sales tax, purchase and use, and so forth. So this is also maybe a different experience, simply because of the composition of the revenues going into the Ed Fund. So Senator Sorokin, Senator Pearson, you had two questions?
Well, my second question was about the general fund transfer. I'm assuming everything's on the table and we hope nothing is needed, but.
There's no general funded transfer.
Right.
Well,
that's gone.
and right. So I mean, I do come back to this question. If we fully fund the ed fund for one quarter, how do schools deal with quarter 3 through or 2 through 4? And
Well, we'll have to, yeah, I understand. And there's certain things we've actually had to express intent. And we've done that certainly with VSAC, for example, where they have expenditures. Same is true with transportation. So I'm going to have to see how the House dealt with that. But I think we're the appropriation will probably be at the level that the spending is. And as the chair points out, then the issue is going to have to be addressed in June. But I don't know. I'm sure Ways and Means and Approps in the House, they're having to deal with that very question with their Q1 budget.
So my question, I think it's been answered, but you're saying of the CARES money, your intent is to hold back 150 million for school spending on the hopes that either the federal policy changes or creative minds find a way to say it's just not supplementing something that otherwise was in the budget. So
Right.
that leaves us like with $1 million in CARES spending. Are you thinking that way for the general fund at all, or for the transportation fund, or are you determined, or is the House and the Senate Appropriations Committee thinking in those areas they have to cut spending to meet the shortfall?
No, we haven't gotten to.
I mean, we have this cross dynamic going on. On one hand, we hope we can use some of that money to meet shortfalls in our other budgets, but from the other end, we're having the pressure, like with housing, how fast we can spend the money to meet the December 30th deadline. And you start making commitments on housing, you want to make them soon, so you get the cash spent or
Absolutely.
incurred by December 30th. So it'd be nice to figure out if we can agree as to what's available and what needs to be parked.
I think that's going to be the chair's meeting tomorrow morning.
Okay.
That's where we're looking at that overall grant and what we have available, and how we, as a Senate, would prioritize. And obviously housing, broadband, there are a number of have come to the top. So that will be the topic, because everybody's saying, just tell me how much there is available. But I will tell you that right now, there are a couple of things. We want to reserve money for 21 to help us deal with it. The other thing that is also different is, as of July 1, we have nothing budgeted until we do the Q1 budget. When this grant first came in, we were operating within the appropriations that had already been made for the fiscal year. So that's another dimension here around the CARES money, around where we may have some flexibility. So
does the CARES budget, the CARES money, has the governor proposed? I know there's isolated, he trickles out some ideas, obviously large ideas, but has he put together a budget of 1.25 billion of how to spend all that money, or do we not know what he wants to do with all that
no,
money?
I have not seen anything, but but we have to do it. We have to do it. And that's the purpose of the meeting tomorrow, is to lay that out.
I mean, wouldn't that
Madam
look
Chair?
like one-time spending in his budget? Wouldn't that be the way it normally would come out? But he hasn't proposed that.
No, we seem to be getting it
Piecemeal.
initiative by initiative, but we don't forget we've already spent money.
Yeah.
We already spent money through the joint fiscal process for those really emergency upstart, and then in the BAA.
Right.
And then we've done it. We've added some other use, and that had to do with the interest on loans so they can pay the ed fund, and then this other bill that we'll be rolling out. So it has been done sort of incrementally. That's tomorrow. I've provided a list of what we've spent, obligated, what we're proposing to reserve, and what we would have available for committees to discuss.
Have you provided that list to the Senate? Because I may have seen it or not.
No, I have not. It's tomorrow. Chairs.
Okay.
Senator McDonald. I'm going to have to wrap this up. I think we're going to have to cancel Graham and Dan for today.
Well, I'm sorry. I'm taking.
No, we were
No.
behind on the, before we got to you.
Senator Kitchell,
Yes.
Yes.
your plan certainly makes a lot of sense. If its goal is to make sure that we get through this year without using any COVID money, because you can't use COVID money to fill holes in current budgets, and reserves that COVID money to be used exclusively in the next year's budgets. Is that why you have put forth this order of taking these things up to achieve that goal?
Well, you make me smart. It sounds smarter than maybe I am, Mark. No. Yes, we've used it where we felt we had to. Obviously, we closed out 20 with the least amount of wrenching. We may have to, and as we do the budget forward, we may have to use. We've been really very good about building our reserves for this kind of environment. You know, that's another dimension, and so we don't want to empty everything out precipitously. We want to be, as I say, we want to be judicious and give ourselves as much protection for the fiscal unknowns as we possibly can.
Thank you, Madam Chair. The Chair of Appropriations is always modest about her the wisdom that she puts into her work. So.
Jane, it's my understanding, even in next year's budget, we cannot presently use COVID to replace lost revenue. We have to find something that we would have paid for with general fund or ed fund money that we can attribute to COVID.
That's right.
And pay for it with that.
That's right. But if we don't reserve it, then
right.
We've shut off that whole ability to do that examination and determine it, how to make it and document it as a permissible use. Yeah. And I think maybe that's what Senator McDonald was talking about as well.
Thank you for translating my words, Senator Kitchell.
Okay.
Okay. Senator Brock, did you have a question?
Well, I just wanted to raise, and I'm not sure whether Senator Kitchell is familiar with it. We have been talking about the housing issue in economic development, and I know one of the issues that's come up is purchase of properties that could be used to house homeless people and to meet other kinds of housing needs. And the issue becomes one of what money can be obligated and when, particularly vis-a-vis COVID money. Mm-hmm. And my understanding is that COVID money has to be spent and completely committed by the end of December. And so if you purchase a property that you buy today and you have the expenses associated with renovation for occupancy, so long as it's done, the renovations are completed this year. But in the event that some of it cannot be completed this year, that it extends into a future year, it's my understanding, and I'm just wondering your opinion based on what you've seen so far, that those monies could not be invested in a project that starts this year, but does not finish until some year in the future. Is that your understanding?
Yeah, that seems to be the guidance we're getting from Treasury, and that's the challenge with the broadband as well.
Oh yeah.
But there are ways that you can do the acquisition, and then you could use some of the regular funding from VHCB for the work that extends. But I do know that we've been trying for a couple of years to address the temporary housing needs and the heavy reliance on, the hotels or the motels. And that's not very desirable. So it does mean that they have been looking at properties that could be acquired that would help expand that capacity, because some of the things like the tents or the campers or long-term use of motels in the general assistance program has been viewed as not desirable. So I think, yes, we have to look at that and say, what are we taking on? And then how do we sort of braid together those funding opportunities from what is in the base and available, and what the CRF money gives us for additional oomph to build capacity in those areas where we've really had endemic problems.
So could I ask a specific question to follow up on this? Because
I'm going to have to cut this off because I see that our next people are there. Graham and Dan, I apologize. I don't think we're going to get to you today. We'll move you into next week.
Oh, Graham, do you have a baby yet?
I do not. Anytime now, though.
Oh, okay.
I know June 8th is the technical due date, but it could come at any moment.
Yeah.
So-
Last truly independent choice that child's going to make for some time.
I'll be here working until the final moment, though. So if you have any questions, send them along.
Let us know.
All right. So I'm going to let you get back to your agenda, and Randy, I do like that sideboard you've got there. It looks like one I might have.
Oh, good.
And it looks like your silver is better polished than mine. So I'm quite impressed.
Thanks.
Polished silver?
Oh, God, I have the queen of tarnish.
I
So
put mine in a plastic bag. It works.
So thank you, everybody.
Okay, thank you. Okay, committee. In exploring our doomsday, in case can't find enough ways to backfill with COVID money, or the feds don't see the light and allow us to do that. And again, this is totally new territory for the Ed Fund. I know it's always annoyed the people on appropriations that education, that we were cutting safety net programs and education was totally protected. They voted in a 10% increase, they got it. This year, they didn't get it. We've got a bigger hole than anyone could ever have imagined. And so we are creating new territory. And it's also probably about time we have a talk with the school boards, the agency, the superintendents, to see where their thinking is as we work our way through this. So try and see that out. But today we are on the cut tax, raise revenue, or borrow options that we kind of have. And I see Ashland is on, Tom Eustace is on, and the treasurer is on. And the question was, if we had to borrow, can we borrow anything? If we get to this end of this year and we've got a little $50 million hole, is it better to borrow it all? Is it better to only borrow half and raise taxes or other revenue? Is it, so Treasurer Pierce, I'm gonna look at this as your kind of program. And no, I don't know. I've got Beth there, but I don't have a microphone. Ashley.
Hi, this is Beth.
You are here. Okay. This is your
Yeah.
dog and pony show. Can you walk us
Gotta do
through
this.
the ins and
Yeah.
outs of borrowing? How much can we borrow? Can we borrow anything without doing debt? How do we do it? What would be the best way to do it? Floor is yours.
Okay. Well, borrowing would be your last resort. Are we talking ed fund or are we talking general fund? I just want to be
We're
clear.
talking ed fund and we're having a little trouble hearing you. Can you?
Okay, hold on. Is that better?
That's better. Yeah.
Okay. So, the other day, Ways and Means took a look at this, and they're working on a bill, and there was a series of approaches that they had, and the last item on there was if all else fails, the option of doing some type of borrowing. Now, I would say that is your last resort, and there's a couple of things we could do before you had to do an external borrowing. One is an interfund borrowing, which means that we would borrow from ourselves. And essentially, the general fund would advance money to the education fund or another fund, for instance, transportation or whatever fund. But
They're
they
all
would
broke
advance
too,
money
Beth.
to them. Excuse me?
I said they're all broke too.
Yeah. But our cash position is strong. The state's cash position, we expect not to have a problem getting to July 15th and sometime thereafter. So our position is ability to pay the bills is there.
That's
I
this
think
July 15th or July 15th, 2021.
This July 15th.
Okay.
And once you receive those revenues and start going, we do have money that's, and you gave us authority to extend that to August 15th. In addition to that, there's a period in December when we're a little bit on the low side that you've provided. If we needed to do more, we could do that. So our interfund borrowing is such that we could do a pretty good job there. And the nice thing about interfund borrowing is efficient. It doesn't cost anything because we're borrowing from ourselves. That would be our first option. A line of credit would be the next, where you, if that was necessary. We haven't done a deficit bond since 1991. We got through we did in 2003, so September of 2003 to February of 2004, we did a $48 million cash flow bond because of the same thing. We were worried about our ability in December 10th with the ed fund payments going out the door and the money coming in, that we would be in a position that our cash that might be a little on the low side. As it turns out, our cash position was fine. The fact that you folks have done a good job in funding our stabilization reserves is the reason that our cash position is so strong. So I would recommend, if you're looking at that borrowing, that we would look to those rather than doing a tax anticipation note or something. I do need to caution, borrowing doesn't fix the budget, because borrowing, you would get the cash, but then you'd have a liability on the other side to pay it back. So if you're looking at the ed fund, particularly on a GAAP basis with the financial statements, it would still show a deficit if you did that, and that would be something that rating agencies would look at. Others would look at it. It doesn't solve your budget problem. It simply gives you the opportunity to pay your bills. One of the things I would recommend, and I don't, is something that we took a look at in appropriations. They ended up going a different way on the budget side, but what I was recommending is that they budget revenues from the July 15th period. They elected to do something different than that, although not the reserves. So they're essentially borrowing from the coronavirus relief fund. Steve Klein would have more details on that. It's not something that I have any ability to assess. But what we could do, and this could be helpful, is that when you collect those monies on July 15th, for the purposes of GAAP accounting, for the purposes of your financial statements, you accrue those anyways. You accrue anything that's post for, I don't know if it's a 30 or 60-day period. I'd have to check with
Right,
finance
these are
and
all the
management.
delayed payments.
Yep. So you can, they would be accrued for the purposes of our audited financial statements. That's on an accrual basis. The budget is done on a cash basis. However, what you could do is change that to say, instead of a cash basis, essentially a modified cash basis for 1 year only, which would be able to grab those monies on July 15th and pull them into the current fiscal year 20. For the budget would still be what it is, but your actual dollars coming in, you would be able to essentially treat those as fiscal year 20 monies from the budget side. That would be something that I would recommend. I know that on a budgeting side, the appropriation side was looking at a different alternative, but this would be a way that you would pull those monies in to balance the fiscal year 20. It also has some benefits in terms of comparability from 1 year to the next. Because right now, if those monies are treated on a cash basis in 2021, the problem is that 20 is going to be short because you don't have those revenues in. 21 is going to be higher, not necessarily twice as high because you're going to have some shortfall, but 20 would be very high, and then 22 would be back to normal. So if you're looking at our budget, it's low, then it's high, then it's back to normal. And that creates a little bit of a problem in terms of comparing budgets from year. So I would recommend that as a process. I see borrowing as a last resort for a couple of reasons. One, again, it doesn't solve the problem of the budget because, again, you're going to owe that money back to the folks that bought our bonds. And secondly, there's an interest cost with that, so it costs a little bit more money. If you were going to do it, I think that there is sufficient cash put into our analysis right now to do some interfund borrowing, and then we could assess down the road depending on what our revenue picture looks like. So I'm going to stop talking and let you folks ask any questions. And I'm going to put the window up. I'm actually up in St. Jay's. I'm trying to buy a car. So.
Oh, okay.
So
what? I guess the House has decided to just set the yield based on last year's March's voted budgets. They're going to set the yield, and we're going to go forward, and the school year is going to go forward. And we're just going to set that $130, $160 million hole in the ed fund caused by loss of sales tax revenue by and large, because with the covering the borrowing costs of the towns, we've guaranteed that the property tax revenue will be coming in. But so you'll have the property tax to send to the towns in August and December. But we're $1 million some short in everything else. And the chair of appropriations just informed us that they are $200 million short, which they're looking at doing some economies to account for. I guess my concern is, where do we get the money to give the schools to pay their teachers? Because you think we've got enough in other funds to borrow?
Well,
That-
through July 15th, I'm sure of that. Post
This
July
year,
15th.
yeah, no, we're not even
Yeah.
thinking about July
Yeah.
15th.
Yeah, I would
That's,
have to do some analysis. We do have several places where we could, again, what we could do is a statutory change that allows us to do more interfund borrowing, which means it's not just the money that we have in our funds. It would also be the money that is in the some of the what we call restricted funds, for instance, workers' comp and the medical fund and so on. We could borrow from those, again, not having to go out to market. Ultimately, if we had to, we can go out to market. And frankly, that does not require legislation because the treasurer can issue short-term bonds, and that can be a year, with the approval of the governor. So we have the authority now to do and we did, as I said, in 2003 to February of 2004 for cash flow borrowing. We did not need legislative approval to do that. So we could do that. That's a last resort. But it doesn't solve the problem of what your fund is going to look like. You will not have fund your reserves, and you'll have some type of deficit on our financial books. Budgetarily, that becomes a problem too because but again, I would recommend grabbing those July 15th monies and putting them into 20 so that you've done some repair there and then assess where you are going forward. The legislation that or the bill that Ways and Means was looking at had borrowing in there. I suggested that it be an interfund borrowing so that we could borrow if we needed to during the course of the year. And in addition to that, as I said, we have authority if that is exhausted, if we, for whatever reason, we didn't have sufficient cash. And again, our cash flows so far are very strong that we would be able to do that regardless. But again, it doesn't solve the fact that it's revenues versus expenditures that you're going to be under because that's a loan.
Okay, Senator Sorokin has a question.
So it's similar to the chair question. Do you have a better number in terms of how much we could do in interfund borrowing at this point?
Well, again, it would depend on what time of year and what the other cash flows we'll see in July 15th. Right now, we don't see a low point that's getting back up to that point that I'm doing this from memory that would cause us concern. In addition to that, theoretically, we may be able to, and I'm putting the may in there, borrow from the CRS funds because we're treating those as part of pooled cash, pending a treasury, any treasury clarification. But what we've heard so far from the U.S. Treasury Department is you can use those for cash management purposes. But that would end on December because those dollars have to be out the door by December 30th. At least that's our understanding. We understand that the U.S. Treasury will be issuing further guidance within, they said a week, it might be 2 weeks, but we should have more guidance on that shortly. So it's going to vary from point to point. Right now, I'd say our surplus is something north of $200 million in our not surplus, let me rephrase that. Our cash position is someplace around $200 million, not including typically the restricted funds are between $50 and $70 million, depending on the time of the year. So I don't know if that helps with your question.
Well, it does. It's also very intriguing, the idea that we can borrow from the CARES money. So while the federal government says we can't just throw that money at education spending,
right?
You could borrow it and then throw the borrowed funds at education spending.
Yeah, I think, but again, that would not, you'd have to pay it back. So, and it would show up as a liability on your books. You can't use it for revenue replacement. But our sense is that you could, in fact, borrow against it, pending further clarification from the federal government. I think Steve Klein is looking at the same option in terms of the general fund.
If we borrowed the CARES money, we borrow from the grant. We have a $1.5 billion grant
Yep.
in our hands. We have that cash right now. If we borrowed it and we had to pay it back, I know this sounds very circular. Who would we be paying it back to? Ourselves?
You'd be putting it back ourselves, and then you would be expending it for other services that are appropriate for the CRF fund. I would go back to the chair's point that it would be nice if they gave us some ability to do revenue replacement with either these dollars or a subsequent appropriation. But that's not available right now, so you would have to pay it back. But in the meantime, we believe that it gives us a little bit more clarity, and that's pending what we hear. But the May 4th guidance talked about the need to do that borrowing was something that cash flow management, that it could be part of your pooled cash for cash management purposes. Pending any more clarification of that, we would have to have a conversation about that. But I believe that the borrowing against those funds is appropriate. Again, I'd say I'm 85% sure, not 100%.
So
Go ahead, sir.
Help me understand this. I mean, we have as legislators,
looks like
we have certain roles here, and as our chair has said, we could either tax or cut, or we can borrow.
Yep.
If I'm a business person, if I have an unusual hardship or crisis that faces me that I see the end of, but it's a hard period, such as COVID-19, I may want to borrow some money to get me over the hump before I start raising my prices or cutting my services that are irreparable moves. I want to buy some time. So while you're saying borrowing should be the last resort, as a legislator, I'm not sure it would be my last choice.
Okay. Well, again, I would use the interfund borrowing first as an option, and I think that we gave ourselves a little bit more flexibility in that on the House Ways and Means side, that you can do interfund borrowing. And again, if you needed to, we could certainly, if we exhausted our internal resources, we could certainly go out to the market and do a revenue anticipation note, which is a form of borrowing. So we have that capability and that authority now. Again, what it does is it helps you pay your bills. It doesn't change your audited financial statements and the fact that you have a liability. I guess the example I would use is a few years ago when we did the retired teacher health medical benefit fund. I'm sure I got a few words transposed in that. We borrowed $26 million from our pooled cash from the general fund. So that helped us get over the hump to pay the bills out of that fund, because up to that year, 2014 or 15, we had not budgeted sufficient dollars to cover our pay-go, our monthly premiums. So it got us over the hump. But if you looked at our financial statements, we were $26 million in the hole that first year, and then worked our way down. Actually about 14 some odd billion the first year, and worked ourselves up to around $26 million. And we were able to repay that this past year with a joint work through the legislature and the governor's office with the treasurer's office. So, but our financial statements for that year would show a negative a negative or deficit position. But we were able to pay the bills, and we got through it while we built up resources. And the idea with that was, over time, we will and processes, and it was primarily revenues, building up revenues. But we also saw some reductions in our premiums because of good experience in our So we were able to essentially get to that, and we're at a point now where we can, we've got a little bit of surplus coming into this year, and we would hope, and we still are while the governor's budget didn't include this, we are still hopeful that we can do something called pre-funding and lower our liabilities by over $500 million in the next year. Unfortunately, that wasn't included in the governor's budget. But my point is, was a deficit, but it helped us pay the bills, which is getting to your point. It gave us some room until we were able to build up resources, or in your case, build up resources or cut expenditures. But it's not a permanent solution.
Okay, I need to see this put on paper because we aren't even dealing with this year.
Mm-hmm.
Which is a measly $3 million or $4 somewhere.
Okay. Yeah.
But the bill we did to expand the inter-fund borrowing has whatever you borrow now has to be paid back by August 15th.
Yes, but I think we could build into the for instance, in the case of the Retired Teachers Medical Benefits Fund, we were able to do it over several years. And I think what we did in or at least the House side, was we proposed to them was do a similar language on interfund borrowing and say that you need to pay it back by 2025 or 2026. There was some debate on what 5 years constituted there. But over a 5-year period. So you could borrow and then pay it back over a 5-year period from interfund borrowing. Or if you had to do something else, we would have those options available to us.
Okay, and that would give us the ability. Well, I mean, we'd have to come up with the additional money. So we'd either have to look at the property tax or it cuts, which over 5 years we haven't been really successful at doing. But we would have to find a revenue source because I think right now we don't know what's going to happen to our revenue source. Sounds like the housing market may be picking up.
Yeah, exactly. My apologies for interrupting.
No, that's fine. It's one of the problems here. You can't see people.
Exactly.
All right. So we could go forward and then as our fallback have borrowing to cover whatever we've got as a deficit. And I'm not sure when we'd have to do that. We're going to get our property tax money in, but we've still got 130, they tell us now, $1 million hole. So we've got to come up with $130 million to send to the schools so they can basically pay their personnel and the heat and the lights. Some of which we might be able to cover with COVID, but probably not the things that were anticipated when the budget's passed in March. Definitely not with those. So. Okay.
But again, it won't solve your deficit problem, but it will give you the cash to how to smooth that over a 5-year period, for instance.
Right. I think what we're
which is getting to
thinking.
Senator Sarakin's point.
Yeah. Well, I think no, it won't. We will have to have a plan to pay that back. And
yes.
The obvious place we're going to go is to the property tax and spread it out rather than lay it all on this year. Or the schools may be able to cut. That's one option. And once we run the numbers, it might not look like the greatest option, but it will keep, if we can't use COVID money or enough COVID money, if we can offset some of the costs with that, then we're home free. What we don't know is if that sales tax revenues, you know, we may all run out tomorrow and buy a summer wardrobe and new clothes and, you know, start going out. It doesn't sound like that's happening right away. But if things spike and we shut things back down, or people just stop going out in public, then we could, you know, our money could come in for a month or two and then go away for 3 or 4. So that's what, we don't have a guaranteed income stream like we usually do. So,
Right.
okay.
Yeah.
Any other questions for the treasurer? I am not
would you like-
seeing any.
Okay. Sorry again.
No, you can't see us.
Yeah. Okay. Tom Eustace is our financial advisor, and he may have some added perspective on this. He works with us with the rating agencies and our bonding programs.
Right. That's what I'm trying to get to Tom. Tom, I can see.
Yeah.
You and Ashlyn are just telephones.
All right. Well,
Okay.
After tomorrow, I get my hair cut, and hopefully the gray will be covered too.
How'd you do that? I couldn't get in till next Thursday.
I'm working on it. What can I say? I have a very nice hairdresser.
What tax do we pay with haircuts? None. We need to expand to services. Okay.
Yeah. Okay.
Pay
I'm
anything
gonna let
now to
Tom
get our
talk.
hair cut.
That's pretty much how I felt, Madam Chair. I'm going to put you on mute while Tom is talking. Okay. And if there are any
Okay,
questions,
that's
I'll
great.
still be on the phone. Thank you.
Okay,
Thanks.
good.
Yep. Bye-bye.
Okay, Tom.
Hi, thanks. Thanks for having me. What would you like me to talk about? I can talk about a little bit my perspective on kind of the deficit financings and things.
Yeah, I think that's it. We're just starting right now, working our way through. If we can't use enough of the COVID money,
Yeah,
backfill our hole, what our options are.
right,
And borrowing is always there.
right,
But we also know that if we impact our rating, that then every bond that every town and every school puts out for a number of years is going to feel that they're going to pay the cost.
right, right.
And we are too. So.
So yeah, so my perspective on borrowing and deficit borrowing is I want to tell you about my personal experience. So I was the treasurer of Washington, D.C. during their financial crisis. And I didn't, we had a huge accumulated deficit. It was, I think, $500 million at that point. And this was a long time ago, in 1996. And people were talking about doing deficit bonds to make kind of get that accumulated deficit off the books and have it easier to balance the budget. And I didn't realize until I was in the office for a while that you didn't need, the deficit borrowing was only related to your cash problem. So people did deficit borrowings when they got into really bad financial problems, but really all they were doing were issuing long-term bonds, 10-year, 15-year bonds in order to generate enough cash to pay their bills on the current year. So I think really from a high level, I agree with what Beth says. You have a lot more, your cash is the problem for you in 2021, not the budget. I mean, the budget, I can see where you are. You're looking at, okay, how much maybe how much deficit can we have and still be covered by the cash, and trying to balance how much do we need to cut, or how much do we need to try to make the revenue work for 2021. And that's really hard, and I don't envy your position or any legislative position right now. But what I would say is that I wouldn't rush into a deficit borrowing. Wouldn't do something like that now. I mean, I think you want to wait and you want to do the best you can with your internal resources. You're going to have a lot more flexibility, even if you get to the point sometime in 2021 where you need to borrow internally, or you need to do a small borrowing, say for a tax anticipation note that it would, maybe due in a year or something like that. You want to wait until you absolutely need it. And you want to do the best you can with your existing resources. And that's going to give you the most flexibility, because if you go out to the public market, you're going to lock yourself into a amortization schedule, and you're not going to be kind of forced to use the internal discipline to raise your revenue and lower your expenses in terms of trying to get the budget balanced over time.
Okay, Senator Pearson, you have a question?
Thank you, Tom. I'm hoping you could help me understand what you've just said, because
Sure.
I would have thought cash is not really our problem. The state's got a lot of cash, as the treasurer explained. We have a revenue problem, so
yeah.
Help me understand. That doesn't seem like a cash flow problem at all. It seems like an income problem.
Yeah, you have an income problem for 2021. You have your budget is out of balance, and you're going to try to do everything you can to balance it. And I think the discussion has, that I'm hearing is that it's going to be very, very difficult for you to balance the budget in 2021 because you're unsure of what your revenues are going to be. And you're so in terms of you can manage through without the balanced budget if you have enough cash. Does that make sense? So I'm not suggesting that you pass an imbalanced budget or what the policy decisions, political decisions are, but you have a lot of difficult decisions out there, and ultimately you still need to have the cash in order to pay the school districts, just taking the education fund, to pay the school districts through fiscal year 21. And you're going to do the best you can in terms of the revenues and the expenses. But ultimately, even if you can't balance, even if your revenues and your expenses aren't going to balance, you're going to use the cash through interfund borrowing or some other mechanism in order to make the payments to the schools.
Okay, thanks.
Okay, any other questions at this point? Okay. Thank you, Tom. Thank you, Beth. Ashlyn, I see you're there somewhere. Thank you. Committee, I think everyone's hot and tired, so I'm going to reschedule Dan and Graham, Dan and maybe Graham next week. And go on from there. I'm also going to, Faith just sent me the agenda. On Tuesday, we've got the Tax Structure Commission coming in, and we're going to continue through the miscellaneous tax bill. And I'll put Dan and Graham on there on that personal products. And then on Wednesday, I think we'll have the school folks in just to get a sense as to what they're thinking about how much COVID money we can force feed them and how much they can switch it out and how much they can help us close a $150 million hole. But I think it's important that, and I'd also like to know what's going on with the $27 to $30 million they've received and where that is. So I'll have them in on Wednesday. think about anybody else you'd like to have in or other topics. I'm trying to get something set up with broadband. I haven't met the new consultants.
That'd be
But I'm
great.
gonna-
I think it'd be great.
I'm going to try and do this.
Consultants.
I know we want to work on this issue too. Unfortunately, all the other body needs to work on is the tax issues. And we have little things like broadband to work on, all of which have some real timing issues. We've got to get it out. Yes, Senator, we have your, Senator Sorotkin, we have your bill.
256, yeah. Could we put that on for an hour or so to get make a
Yes.
decision on that?
Oh, 256.
That's the
I'm
one.
thinking of was it 37 from yesterday?
37, I've written to the treasurer to get some language, and I think that's the remaining issue.
Okay, we just had those two little amendments that we'd put on. So I'm going to put that, let's put that on for a vote on Tuesday.
Okay.
And that goes,
The other bill needs to make a decision one way or another because it has to go to appropriations and to the House still. So that's the one that has a bunch of economic development spending in it, as well as we have to make a decision on the project-based tips. And I've written to the veggie people. They promised us a breakdown of what the potential impacts of the Westford project or other projects might be on the ed fund, so we can actually see some real numbers there. Because I don't think they're very large at all, but until they get back to us, we won't know.
at this point, I am taking my guidance from the chair of appropriations, and I'm not looking favorably on any tax deferment. But we'll see. I mean, if I don't kill it, Jane will.
Well, everything
Oh.
other than that particular provision, I would expect would get the same kind of treatment, all appropriations until they put together the budget. It'll take its place in the order of things. But there
Well, I
are
think
mostly appropriations issues. in that
Yeah.
bill.
Well, the TIFs aren't. I think that what we're starting to see with, and I was told the other day, you need to start telling people they'll get what they can get with COVID, and that's it this year. And that's multiple committees, that they're trying to put together like a recovery package, which would be an economic development package. I'd be very interested in perhaps looking at, given the Digger story on the real estate market and the number, and there was another story I saw on New York City and the companies who now have been forced to do telecommuting. And so it's not strange and it's not new. And they're looking more favorably on it. And people are looking more favorably on it. That sounds like a place we might want to put some emphasis.
I'm sorry, what would we be putting emphasis on exactly?
Come to Vermont and telecommute.
Oh.
You know,
Yeah,
I mean,
while we have the broadband consultants in. I
well,
mean,
that's what we've got to do, is find a way to get the broadband out there. And if that's going to be,
and have they been hired, did Jane say?
It sounds like it.
I saw, I think the email we all got, that I don't know the exact, if money's changed hands, but they've contracted with them. I know Randy or Chris, do you know if they've signed the contract?
I
They say
understand.
that the contract has been signed.
Okay.
And got a list of the scope of work. We do have some questions about what's in the scope of work and whether it's broad enough to do some of the things we want. And Chris and I had planned to talk about this after this meeting today.
Okay, because I'd asked to sit down with the pro tem because some of the talk the other day, the all Senate meeting, we're not wanting to get into where we were, needing to make sure we came out of this ahead of the game with broadband. I'm just wondering, we've got a consultant we've hired for a temporary amount of time, but how do we want to set this up? The first thing that came to mind was, do we want to reenact the telecom authority or something similar? I was not chairing finance when it was disbanded. Senator Ash was, so I wanted to get his feedback as to why it was taken down and what we might look at. Because I didn't want to start working on it if he was going to come in and say, oh, no, you don't want to do that. So as soon as I know anything, like when we can talk to these consultants, and I haven't seen the scope of work in the final draft, so I'll get that. I'll ask for it tomorrow. Money Chairs meets on Fridays. But I think broadband, once we get our doomsday, just kind of know what our options are. I think we will start putting a lot of our time in these remaining weeks into getting as elegant, as a friend of mine used to say, as possible program set up, because getting broadband up and going by January 1st is going to be a challenge. So we need to start moving, and we need to get some good people out there and ready to go. So I think that's where we're going to be going after this. So maybe we'll set up, we'll have the school folks in, and then we'll set up a day on broadband next week. Does that work?
Sure.
Yeah. May I also, Madam Chair?
Yes.
So I wonder if one of the things we might do in terms of what we heard from the treasurer, and as we keep hearing from people around, how we might fill holes if need be, if we might want to have them start to break down, or maybe have Ledge Council or Graham, I don't know, break down, again, the different scenarios, the different possibilities, so we can get those in writing.
And I'm going to talk to Joint Fiscal and see if they can start working on that, because
that'd be great. Thank
I'm
you.
sitting here listening to the treasurer, and I was having a hard time seeing
I believe she's
how 30 days, yeah, we might be able to self-finance, but as she said, we've got to have a plan to pay it back.
right.
We will know more. If we do the yield bill as it's coming over, it will get school up and started, and they will have their money guaranteed. It will be our job to come up with that money. But we will know more about that money after July 15th, because the personal income tax and the sales tax payments have been put off until then. We'll also, no, they put Montpelier's final property tax payment off till June 15th. But by the time we get to July, we'll know what the towns are looking at for this year's property tax, what it looks like for next year, and what the sales tax looks like. And we'll start getting some numbers in on sales tax now that we're starting to reopen. So we'll get a little bit better idea of how much of that revenue may come back. And then we'll be able to make some better guesstimates. Okay, Senator Pearson.
Am I the only one that's really confused about how schools handle us with the 1/4, 3/4 issue?
No, that's just the state budget. We're doing a state budget for 1/4. The schools voted their budgets. We have set the tax rate to cover the 4% they increased, and we are obliged to pay them. We have 150, 60, or 30, we got over $100 million deficit. My concern is when we get, you know, we probably, maybe with property tax, we can cover the first payment. But at some point, there's no money in the ed fund. And then what do? We've got to advance it to the schools. Then we'll come back with a hole in the ed fund. And I think what the treasurer was saying is, well, we can interfund borrow to make that payment. But the schools right now, unless I'm terribly wrong, are being held harmless. Somewhat harmless. They're getting their budgeted money, plus they've gotten 27 million. Next year is when we can't kick the can down the road, because technically by the end of next year, right now we don't have a deficit by accounting standards. We will have one by next June, at which point it becomes a problem for our bond rating and everything else.
So you think that by the time the Q1 budget passes, we will make clear our obligation to fully fund the ed fund? We don't know how, but that will be effectively.
That's my understanding of the bill that has come out of Ways and Means, and I read it in the Times Argus. I knew what they were planning, but what that said is they were trying to make it clear that we are not going to fill this hole on the backs of the property tax. Because the property tax is coming in, it's the sales tax that's not. But it begs where we're going to get that money. Right now, they've been working, and I've got to check my emails to see if I can share Senator Harvey's work with you, but she's basically, the House is kind of more generally looking for expenses from the schools that we can use COVID money to fill, and then take that money out of the hole, or use that money to fill the hole, have it be money we don't have to put in. I think Senator Harvey is looking at just cutting everyone's school budget and then using COVID money. She's going on the argument that the more poor kids you have, or, you know, English is a second language, but all of those waiting numbers, that you would get a grant, with the argument that schools are going to have a greater need the higher their weighting or lower their rating. The kids with more needy kids would get more money. There will, I understand, be winners and losers in that, but it is a system that has some logic. So I'll try and get that. I know Chloe has been running numbers for her. And it's a similar concept to what Ways and Means has been looking at. But they wanted to just get it out of the way that they weren't raising the property tax 20 cents this year to cover the hole, and kick the hole down the road. But it's still there. Seems to be getting smaller, but it's only 130, they said. But it went from 50 to 60, so we won't know until we see the final numbers in July when the sales tax is due, and then we probably will have an idea of how the sales tax economy is also working right now. Snow, we've never done this. We have never had to make up a deficit in the ed fund because it's always been guaranteed payment from the general fund. So that's why I want to talk to the school folks next week and see what their thinking is. Because they just got 27 million. That won't fill the hole, but it might help. So any thoughts anyone has, it would be, I'm looking for silver bullets.
Madam Chair, this is Beth. May I speak for just a moment?
Sure.
Sure. I'm going to have to go off the phone, but what I would, I think I have two deliverables. One is to sort of explain what I talked about, and I'll work with Tom to kind of put something together for you. And the other, and I'm aware that is for Senator Sorokin on the other bill. So we will get those deliverables over to you. And thank you.
Okay,
I will
thank
have to sign off unless there are other questions.
No, good luck with your car.
Thank you. Thanks. Bye-bye.
Bye-bye. Okay, committee. I can't even find the time on this new computer.
Madam Chair, I wasn't sure whether you had committed to giving the economic development bill an hour next week so we can make a decision on it.
On 256? Yeah, we'll put that in.
Okay, thank you.
Okay, and we may, I told Faith we would not meet this Friday, but we may have to meet next Friday and go back to a full week schedule. Seeing how things go. So, okay. Thank you all. Anybody comes up with any silver bullets or anybody that you think we should hear from, let me know. And
Ending live stream now.
okay, we're gonna end live stream. Faith, can